So I'm Donovan Finn. I'm an assistant professor at Stony Brook. I've been studying Sandy since the day before it happened, I guess. I'm an urban planner. I study disaster recovery and urban resilience, broadly speaking. I was lucky in Sandy. I was not personally affected. Maybe our cable was out for a few hours, but I spent the last 10 years thinking about it and talking to folks and figuring out what happened and what we can do better next time. So that's my role today. Hopefully, is just to keep the conversation.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining this session. Małgosia Madajewicz. I'm an associate research scientist at the Center for Climate Systems Research, which is part of the climate school here at Columbia. I'm an economist by training, so I'm an academic. I'm also not a community member, which is really hoping to have community voices in this conversation. I've been studying Sandy, Donovan has me beat by about a month. I think I started studying Sandy about a month afterwards. We did interviews with residents and with leaders in the response and recovery effort, particularly focusing on the Rockaways in Staten Island. And then we did a number of surveys with residents, so a lot of data collection over a total of about 5 years, spread out over a 10-year span. I study, so I work on adaptation to climate risk and climate variability in general, but heavy focus on adaptation to coastal flood risk in urban areas and in New York in particular.
Hi everybody, my name is Joe Tyrone, and I'm here probably as a representative of the Oakland Beach Buyout Committee. And I've been studying Sandy since probably the day after Sandy, out of necessity. Also, I run a real estate team called the Joe Tyrone team out of Compass. Compass is very popular in New York City, and I brought Compass, I partnered with them about 3 years ago, and brought them to Staten Island. And I'm also a candidate for New York State Senate on the North Shore, it's District 23, it's North Shore of Staten Island, from the East Shore to the West Shore, and including the peninsula in Brooklyn, Stony Island, Sheepshead Bay, and so on. And really, basically, one big flood zone. So I always say God has a sense of humor. So that's my district. So I want to talk about, when it's my turn, about what the community did and what our response was, which was to sell our homes to the government.
My name is Izzy Morales. I'm the president of the Castle Hill Homeowner Association. We live right in front of the water. I represent 156 homeowners. We went through Sandy, because I'll speak on that. I'll speak on nature, because when most people live on the waterway, sometimes we say how beautiful it is. When you open your door, sunshine, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it is. But remember one thing, nature is trying to teach us a lesson. Nature talks to us all the time. We don't listen. We have a tendency, when they say prepare, we put on our baby suits. When they say go, you say, I'll go back to the backyard, make a hamburger. When the storm comes and your house is not there and your girl's there, then you say, I can't have a hamburger. But I would speak preparing. It's so important. It's overlooked. Not by a few, by all of us. I'll give you just one example. How many of us in this room have a bag to go instantly? Put your hands up. That's just to show you, How many of us depend on medicine? You, your kids, your mother, your grandfather. Usually it's a family of 5 or 4. I say you should have a bag ready for each one of those individuals. Ready, not to get it ready. Ready. Because when you gotta go, they believe you're going to the bathroom. You gotta go. That's the best way to describe it. You have to leave instantly. We just saw Florida, right? Where they told people 5 days in advance. You live in low-lying areas, move, get out, prepare. Things are coming. Hurricane 2, Hurricane 3, force, it went to 5, I'm correct, right? People were still there in the last minute. Why? I always ask, what's more important, your possessions or your life? That's something you have to look at. People worry about their watches, the $1 million painting. The foggiest ideas I think about when I think about what I went through and my neighbors went through. And remember one thing, people suffer in different categories. Got the rich, got the poor, got the middle class. Suffer differently. Rich got the insurance, the poor, the government's gonna take care of you. Middle class America, you're on your own. It's rough. The people save all their money, right? They say, well, I'm gonna move down to Florida, right in front of the beach, Can't get flood insurance. What are you doing there? People in North Carolina do the same thing now. Wherever you go in America, flood insurance, you're not gonna get it. You're not gonna get it. These states know that devastation is $1 billion. Insurance companies, billions of dollars. Right now in Florida, just to fix parts of Florida, it's gonna cost them $60-50 billion. And that affects all of us. People think, well, I don't live in Florida. It affects you. You have to really take a look at it. And I'll be speaking about those things. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's just occurred to me that before we dive into things, we need to appoint several
I was
roles.
just making a note for myself.
Right?
Yeah.
So, is there anybody who would volunteer to report, and preferably not among the speakers, but from the audience, who would volunteer to report back, during the report back, to report the main points from the session today? Anybody be interested in doing that? Great, thank you, that's awesome.
Thank you. We have a timekeeper, but we also need someone to take notes. Maybe in addition to the reporter, a second person to triangulate notes. Is anybody interested in that task?
I can try to do that. I'm already taking notes, but I'm
Okay.
not going to the report back, so I
Okay.
love that.
You email them, maybe. You'll have your own. Sorry, what's your name?
My name's Avni.
How do you spell it?
It's AVNI.
All right. You can keep your own notes, or maybe
Yeah.
you can acquire
We'll
them.
figure it out.
So the point of today was is hopefully of the session is to hear stories of sort of bottom up, self-help, self-organized experiences from our two panelists. We both have heard a lot of stories as well, and I'm assuming some of you have as well. But someone in an earlier session that I was in did something interesting. Who here lived in New York City during Sandy? And who feels that they were personally affected by Sandy? I guess anyone. Yeah. Okay, so not all of us, certainly. But those of you who were, those of you who know people that were, those of you who've spent their last decade hearing the stories of those who were, we want to hear those stories as well. The purpose here today is to learn from what communities figured out on their own worked, and maybe sometimes it didn't work. There's a lot of stuff today about what the city and the federal government didn't do. But the focus here today is what bubbled up from the neighborhood level, from the block level, from the household level that was effective in short-term response, long-term recovery, what have you. So I think the first thing we're going to do, maybe Margaret has something to add, but we're going to let Joe and Izzy talk a little bit about on that question of something they were involved in or know about from their own experiences. That was sort of bottom up, and then hopefully a larger conversation that all of you are not only welcomed but heavily encouraged to participate in can emerge. So I'm not going to add anything.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. So our charge is really to look at the response to Hurricane Sandy, which means sort of the short to medium term, the first weeks to months after the storm. But I would suggest that we broaden that a little bit to include recovery and perhaps building resilience for the future. So that we look at how community responded over the longer term, but let's make sure to address that response, that sort of early part. And it would be great if we had the perspective of, you know, what are the stories from the response after Sandy that help us figure out how to do better for the future, right? What are the lessons that we can draw from those responses? What is it that we need to fix? And what are some good examples of how we can go about fixing it? You know, stories of what worked that we can use next time as opposed to all the disasters.
And Raksha is going to let us know when the speakers have gone for 5 minutes, and hopefully we can go 5 or a little more, and then that'll be still a significant amount of time for some discussion. Joe, you want to take it away and tell us about your experience?
Right, sure. So in terms of recovery, I believe that buyouts is by far the best way to financially recover from a disaster. And in my mind, no doubt, because I also had experience with the Building Back program as well, and that was to me a complete utter failure. You know, and if I had more time, I would say complete utter failure. But we only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to condense it. So, so I was on this boat thing with Kate with the Waterfront Alliance, which was fantastic. And one of the things that I noticed when all the speakers got up, they always had these really cool acronyms, and I could not really follow what the acronyms were and these initials, and then I would raise my hand and say, what does that mean? So I came up with the session before this with an acronym. It just hit me because I thinking, what am I going to talk about? And my acronym for the buyouts is very simple. You can remember it. Get out. Get out. So I think everyone's going to. Oh, yeah, right.
You should say, get out,
So it's and it just popped into my head. It was a real, like I wasn't even thinking, it just came in, except for the last part, the out part. I was thinking two, but then that's what two. Out. So it's government-enabled transition. So that's what this is. And how do you accomplish it? By being organized, united, and having trust, and building trust. So, and that's basically my whole 5 minutes, because that's really what it was all about. But of course, I'll expand on it a little bit. After in Staten Island, we had the worst of Sandy. It was the epicenter of the storm, because between Sandy Hook and Coney Island, it created this like spin effect that the scientists have studied, and the wave height was 15 feet in the Fox Beach section of Oakland Beach. Fox Beach is the closest to the water. So the storm surge comes in a community that already had suffered through Isaac 2 years before, Irene the year before. They had just finished recovering from that and finishing, for the most part, it was basements and stuff, but they just finished their repairs, and Sandy was a knockout blow. And on the Fox Beach street, which is where I had my property, it was a rental property, 3 of cherished neighbors passed away. They died in their basements, and one was a father and his son who had a twin son who stayed with the mother. So the other twin was with the mother; she was safe, and the other was this very popular guy who was a postman at the top of the block, and they all died in the basement. So that was devastating to the community, and it was a real wake-up call that there's something wrong with this neighborhood as much as they loved it. So this was a generational neighborhood. They absolutely loved it, but after, they also had these tall, like these like 12-foot reeds that were very highly flammable. And Staten Island, I learned a lot, you know, after this happened through this committee that we formed, is the #1 place in New York State for brush fires. And it was because of this area that was called the Blue Belt. So in the Blue Belt, they were issuing, the city, the agencies that never talk, the building department was issuing building permits for builders, and DEC and DEP were competing against them to buy the vacant lots to expand the Blue Belt. Because what the Blue Belt was, it was a sponge, it was a marsh. They decided not to build storm sewers in Howard Boulevard in their portion, or the water runoff into this community. So with that, I found out myself through the SBA when I was looking to recover from my loss, my financial loss with my property, I found out about the buyout program. Because when I told the guy, I don't know why I'm borrowing money, I don't want to build it back, he said, why don't you get bought out? So he referred me to Nashville, Tennessee and upstate New York. And they were going through buyouts. Nashville, Tennessee on a consistent basis because they were river flooding, and upstate New York was because of Isaac and Irene. And so I was tutored by the two leaders in those communities, found out how to do it, and they taught us how to be organized, what you had to tee up for the government. Was one of the really premier lessons of this was that, and it's true to anything that you're doing when you're dealing with government officials, it's very rare, running for office for several reasons, and one of the things I know that this is a problem, is when you have a problem in your community and you go to your official and you say, look, this is happening and that's happening, fix it. They're not gonna fix it, because then they don't have the time to fix it. So, it's 5 minutes, okay. So I'll just continue with 10 minutes. They don't have the time, so what you have to do is you have to tell them, this is what we're entitled to, and this is what we want, and it made me go in, this is why we want it. So we were taught by the other two cities on what to give the government, what to tee up for the governor, and he took it from there. God bless him. But, you complain all you want about this guy, but in this particular instance, it was amazing what he did. So our community started with 165 people, 185 people. Out of that, 175 got bought out. The next community was 135. All 135 got bought out, and then 2 more communities for a total of 550. And so I don't know if you call that recovery, but financial recovery it certainly is. The community, didn't stay there. So I don't know how you look at that from a recovery perspective. But the larger community was able to recover because now this serves as a buffer, which is what nature intended.
Can I ask you a question? I know they bought them out, and I'm just interested. Where did they go?
That's a great question that everyone, and I've been fighting with GOSR. It's another acronym, GOSR, which is GOSR again, Government Office of Storm Recovery.
Where did they
It
go?
can get out better, come on. You can remember that. So I've been arguing with them in a very nice way. Just tell me where everyone went.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to know their residence, I just want to know the zip codes. So about 2 weeks ago, we got pretty close. So I think I had like half the residents. So go on my website. My website is foxbeach165.com. I created on the fly when we were doing this whole thing, but I've updated it since then. Not to the point where I really think it would be a better resource, but people from all over the world will go on the website, contact me, ask questions. But it's a good resource to see what we did and how we did it. So a quick answer is most of them stayed on Staten Island.
Okay.
Most of them stayed on Staten Island in higher, higher area, higher elevation areas.
Well, we sustained a lot of water damage at the lower end. Where the YMCA, when the water came in from the sound, it flooded the YMCA, and it flooded the low-level homes on that side. I say at 154 homes, I'd say about maybe 24 of them got flooded. The roofs, a lot of shingles were blown off, windows were displaced. How did you get together? People were terrified. People in general don't know what a hurricane does. They don't. They have the foggiest idea until you experience it. Now, I was not fortunate enough in Puerto Rico. I experienced it too. I was 15 years old, living with my grandfather and my grandmother in a shed with a metal roof. And that was paradise for us. It used to rain at night, and you had the mango trees all over the place, and we used to play. It was beautiful. Till the storm came. When the storm came, the house was gone. My grandmother, she was on her knees praying for God to bring it back. That was her mother's home. That was her home. Second hurricane, Puerto Rico, I was in Cerro Gordo, the beach we saw, and they advertised that the ocean went to rise 15 feet. I heard 15 feet. I said, oh, I'm not gonna stay here. up the mountains I went. People stood there. Okay? A lot of people drowned, a lot of people gone, a lot of property was washed away. Erosion on these islands, not only Puerto Rico, all the islands, it's a major problem. Because they don't let the water flow right, blocks it off. Worst experience I had with people was people needed generators to keep themselves alive. Some of them wanted dialysis, some needed oxygen. So me, as a Boy Scout, I mean, back to the fire station, listen, I need this stuff. Call my elected officials. I don't need it tomorrow, I don't need it next week, I need it today. People are dying. If you don't get here, they're gonna die. They came. God bless. Really came to say that. Response time was good. I put pressure on pressure. I did not let up. I was probably, me and Henry Sosa, I went to my elected officials and I told them, I need food in front of my house, I need dry ice, and I want it now. And every day, trucks came with food, dumped it on my grass. My wife was really pissed off at me. But remember, it was September, and it was getting cold. So I had a lot of kids in the community. The parents came up to us, they wanted heat. There wasn't gas stations were shut down. Electricity was gone. We didn't have electricity for 3 weeks. So what did I have to do? I had to run around and use some of my friends in contracted places. When they got generators, put generators where I had to put them at. I put a big screen in the back of my house for the kids in the neighborhood to come and watch a movie to get their nerves settled. Made hot dogs, hamburgers for them. But their parents, their grandparents, it's easy for me to talk about it, but watch their face. How terrified they were, how nervous they were. They couldn't go to the doctor. They had to go to the nearest emergency room. You have to see how emergency rooms operate on hurricanes and disaster. The line is around the corner. Because everybody runs there. And they're not prepared. We're not prepared. So imagine they're not prepared. And you gotta get in there. And it was devastating. It was really, really devastating. I had, some people had heart attacks. I mean, it was bad. It was bad. The young kids, 5 years old, 10 years old, they walk around like in a glaze. It's shocking for them to see any kind of devastation. Staten Island, I know, was very, very bad. And thank God for sanitation, where you were at. The sanitation went and removed almost 100% of that stuff.
They were amazing. They were the unsung heroes.
Right, and no one ever said thank you to the department.
Only the residents, but.
And they were there every day.
Yeah.
24 hours.
Sifting through the garbage and bringing back what they thought was valuables. I never saw anything like it. Definitely
It's-
impressed. They were
listen,
amazing.
You know, we live in a city. I guess how many of you are from New York? How many of you are not from New York? Now, where you live at?
India,
Where you live at?
New Jersey.
Did you prepare? Where you live at?
Jersey.
Huh?
Jersey.
Okay, you like New York. Now, I could tell you in India, because when devastation comes, it's very hard. Because you have a lot of poor people, poor areas, and once they lose their houses, what happens? They're in the streets, right? New York City, greatest city in the world, correct? That's what they tell us. Prepared? No. No. Are they prepared today? No. They keep on telling us they are. They keep on saying they're doing things. But 3 sectors here. Where you live at matters. Am I correct? Where you live at matters. Where you live at in India matters. Who gets service first? Why does it work like that? Are we not one? Don't we care for each other? So the government comes in, who gets the squeaky wheel? We have to say it, we know it. Who gets the squeaky wheel?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Did you see something in the response to Sandy, or if you want to say from your experience in Puerto Rico, of what, what's an example of what we should be working towards?
I say to this very day, I think that programs should be in schools. Programs should be taught to our kids at school about emergencies, of hurricanes, and any disaster in New York City. That should be a mandatory program. Parents try to teach their kids. We know it's very difficult. But kids should have that in school, not only at an early age, in high school, junior high school, and even in college. Being prepared is the essential thing of keeping yourself alive and your family alive. Being prepared is the difference of life and death. Yes, because in most cases, people make the wrong mistakes. And we ask ourselves, why? Did anybody ever speak to them about these things? Did anybody ever educate them? No,
And
No.
you're still not doing it.
no. So disasters should be part of education in every level to get ready. In my church, we speak about it in our church. We do things like that. I have today, I still talk to my neighbors. I always ask them. I walk by my neighbor's house. Hey, Mr. Rodriguez, you got a bag ready? He said, a shopping bag? No, not a shopping bag, But you try to remind them. Remind yourselves, please, pack your bags. Put your flashlight, put your battery, put your water, put your dry food in it. When they say go, listen, look how many people live in New York. 8 million registered, maybe another 3 million not registered. I lived through 9/11. I was there. How did people move? On their feet. System wasn't working, telephones weren't working, banks wasn't working. And was anything working in New York? No. And now everything that we depend on, did it work? No. So imagine, and these disasters are going to get worse. The ocean is going to get warmer. The water level is going to go 2 or 3 inches higher. Hurricanes are not going to be the name. You'll have super hurricanes, which is very scary. We just seen one in Florida, devastation. See what happened in New York? Imagine that was 100 years for New York, right? You think it's going to take 100 years for another one to get here?
So maybe we should take some questions
Yeah.
from people, because obviously the community response that you're envisioning is inadequate.
Right.
So mine was a little bit different.
Yeah.
In that it was different, it was a community response, but it was very succinct, it was very direct, it was almost forensic. So I guess if other people have questions about whether Izzy just, what he was talking about, or what I was talking about, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
And also, so either questions for the speakers or your own experience. So most of you raised your hands for that you had experience of Sandy. So the other people want to chip in as to what was the response that you saw, were there good examples of ways to move forward that you want to bring up?
Well, I will say something. So thank you, Izzy, so much for being here. I worked with Izzy on the studio this past semester, and actually, Joe, you came to our class. Yeah. So this studio was looking at managed retreat and community sentiments towards managed retreat, but also flood and resilience. And, getting, the goal of our project was to get, be a really community-driven, project where we really got to deep with, community leaders, especially, community leaders in New York City that, aren't traditionally have not been a part of the conversation about, Sandy and other disasters that have happened here. You often see, mainstream environmental groups being a part of the conversation, but this is actually, Izzy, this is one of the first like conferences you've been to, the East Bronx, places like Castle Hill, Little Puerto Rico, Hardin Park, Blossom Point. These are communities, with, lots of community leaders, different groups, homeowners associations that have, experienced natural disasters and have not been a part of the conversation. So, I'm glad that, I just want to say, I'm glad that Izzy is here. And, my question to Izzy would be, you mentioned some of what you saw in Castle Hill, but could you speak more to what you saw in neighboring communities like Little Puerto Rico? And
Little Puerto Rico was flooded. Little Puerto Rico reminded me when I was a kid in Puerto Rico. But those homes, are bungalows, a lot of them. 75% of that community is water to water, like a Staten Island. So when that water came up there, they were they got it both sides, but they got it from the Long Island Sound, and then they got it from the Harlem River comes right around. So they were getting hit on both sides. And the wind, and the people, listen, they lost everything. And like we said, you know what happens? We live in the Bronx. Nobody talks about the Bronx. You know what I'm saying? Nobody. We're a community very resistant, very macho. We like to take part in things, but no one talks about us. No one says, how did they suffer? What they went through? Nobody says, give me a hand. Like, don't get me wrong, everybody ran to Staten Island because you were hit there. And so, rightly so, you got a lot of help.
But they
Well,
respond to Staten Island.
But we needed,
No response.
right, we needed a response, and let me tell you, like you said, if you didn't get it together, if you didn't unite, if you didn't demand, you went to get it. Where'd they get it?
So, can I just follow up on that with both of you? You can go first. This is a theme that's been coming up, for a long time and throughout this conference. There needs to, so communities have the knowledge of what is needed, what the needs are in the community, what can work, and what is the community vision for what they want. But they don't have very many resources. Public sector has the resources. They don't have the local knowledge of what's going to work, what's needed, what do people want. These partnerships have not, the partnerships between the communities and the public sector have not worked exactly very well, but resilience, future resilience probably depends critically on them. So you're both talking, you were speaking to the fact that in order to get this buyout together, you had to be organized, you had to put pressure on the government. As far as what I knew about the buyouts from before, there was actually, the organization effort went way back a number of years before Sandy.
Well,
So
part of that,
yeah.
partly true.
Just a question, lessons for strengthening that cooperation between communities and the public sector to bring those, to bring the knowledge and the resources to work together?
The second T to get out is trust, right? And so that's what we did, we built trust. And the only way to be successful in any community endeavor is for the people to have trust. And what happens in Sandy, and I've seen it in other things, where the community just generally does not trust the government. And that's very pervasive in today's society for all different reasons. So, so if you look at it, we're just looking at it from a house getting purchased, which is these buyouts, is a new concept, which is managed retreat. And that could never, ever be accomplished without that ingredient. That ingredient, because it's going to start from the government. The government is really starting to, New York City has a whole division on it, council, whatever they created, but they're looking at whatever agency is looking at managed retreat throughout New York City. And they're trying to figure out, they came to us to say, how did you do that? Because we want to buy other people, but it's totally different because there's no storm. So, so how do you convince people that it's a legitimate program and it's not eminent domain where they're really coming in and they're making you leave? So every community, and it's the same, it's those ingredients. It's being organized, united, and then gathering the trust. Every community needs a person who's a representative, who's going to be the liaison between the government who wants to support it. We never had to fight for our buyouts. That's the weird thing that happened. All we did was present it, and they came right to us. We didn't have to demand anyone, and we did it by just completely isolating ourselves. We didn't allow the press into any of our meetings, and we didn't allow any elected officials into our meetings, because the officials were walking around the street saying, we're gonna build you back, we're gonna build you back, shaking hands, we're gonna take it. And people are like, get out of here. It was the most ridiculous thing. And I'm like, every time I get up to speak in front of the people, I said, listen, first of all, because they didn't recognize me, I had an investment property. They didn't know who I was, but I knew some of the people where this committee got formed. And 5 of the 8 had formed a committee in 1992 after an unnamed storm brought 5 feet of water into the neighborhood, and they were advocating for a wall, for a seawall. So I used all of that, so our 8-person committee met once a week. I used all of their information that they kept bringing every week to show why we were entitled to this, and then I did the research and how the buyouts work, and we just combined those two. So I was able to build trust with the community. When I got up, I started to say, I told them for all the wrong reasons. I didn't want to get sued. So I said, listen, I am not a government official. Don't rely on anything that I'm telling you as if it's the truth. I'm just telling you what I'm learning. And this is what I'm learning. I said, I am a storm victim just like you. I had a house on 87 Fox Beach, got destroyed, my tenants lost everything, and I'm looking at these buyouts for these reasons. So I'm in it with you. I'm not, but that, I didn't realize it. That helped me build trust, because they said, okay, this is not a government official. And the other 5 people in the committee that were in that committee area says, yeah, Joe's a good guy, he knows what he's talking about. So that's how that works. So the only way that you can, in my mind, to be successful in that is to bridge that gap. And the only way to bridge that gap is to find the stakeholders in the community that really care about it, and then let them be the liaison.
I have one thing to say. I noticed that when I went to see the politicians, they had no one in their staff, no one, not even themselves, ready to address any of the questions I had. And I say, to make a point, elected officials should have classes for themselves. Prepare. If you live on waterways, and you got communities in the water or next to the water, they should have staff ready.
Right.
Ready. And they don't, not one single one of them. And to this day, they still don't have. They have staff for everything else, but they don't have staff for disasters. Why? And the question is,
all our local officials.
right, and
None
the
of
question
them
is
knew what a
why?
buyout was.
Right.
Not one of them.
None of them.
And we're in Highland.
And none of them. And they're elected officials, and they're the ones that got to answer. But they don't have to answer because they're not trained, their staff is not trained. And we're the ones asking them for things to help us, and they're not ready.
Well, the new guy in District 23 is gonna know.
I just wanted, from knowing Joe and knowing Izzy and knowing a few other folks that have done a lot of organizing in different ways, I think that is a thing that is a common thread to me in remembering Sandy and remembering Occupy Sandy and remembering all of these different, and the pandemic, frankly, all the mutual aid groups that popped up, some of which are still in existence. And I think your question, Mongoja, of sort of like what do we learn from this and where do we go with that? I think Mariah, I forget her last name, is speaking. She's OEM, Office of Emergency Management, is speaking on a later panel. And there were a bunch of community response groups that were sort of formed formally, informally after Sandy and actually after the pandemic. I think the pandemic was the first time that a connection between the city agency and a lot of those communities was funded. And the more that we can figure out how to fund these community and volunteer organizations that are doing this work in between the storms is the really big gap that I see. And it's really hard to get that FEMA funding to a community group or get it out of government when there's not an emergency happening, and they're by far best suited to get there quickly and get medicine and generators, wherever needs to go.
I mean, they should be, and you might agree with me, I think in each community on the waterfronts, there should be stockpiles of emergency equipment ready for them. There should be an area in every community on the water, who live by the water, have residents of the water, that a stockpile of equipment is there for them. And that's essential, because you know and I know, what do we need? Generators. We need dry food. We need lights. We needed things to just keep the community back to, not 100%, but to a certain point that they're comfortable and they know that work is being done to try to improve their lives. So I'm a firm believer that each community on waterfronts, they gotta be stockpile of equipment available to the community. Not wait till disaster come and you gotta wait a week, 3 days, 5 days. You know and I know, people can't wait that long.
So, I know we're at time, but
I
yeah.
have to make my point. It was
Go
just,
ahead.
okay, it was just one point. I'm from the Jersey Shore. I worked at Lowe's Home Improvement during Hurricane Sandy, and I saw the thousands of people come into Tom's River flows to buy the supplies, the wood, the batteries, the things to cover up the windows, all those extremely important, like protect your own property, emergency preparedness, things you need to survive the storm. And that really taught me that I really needed to focus on climate change, and that led me to get this a job at FEMA so that I could really be an emergency manager and prepared. And finally, with Blue Acres in New Jersey, they had that's their buyout program for all the state of New Jersey, and they have a sort of a liaison for each property owner, because buyouts are voluntary, as Joe was saying, and if you don't have that community buy-in, but you just have an individual property owner that's like, I don't want to live through this anymore, they had somebody there to like update them, because buyouts take an extremely long time, multiple years. It's a very difficult process, and it's hard for the individual and the family, but Blue Acres did a good job of having the person that was talking directly to the property owner.
So that's one more.
Oh, I would ask you a question. Now, the homes on the water, did they lift them up?
No, not in the buyout areas. They did that in the second two buyout areas. They gave them a choice between build it back and actually buying it. So those people who chose the build it back program, they had the houses raised, or they had them knocked down and rebuilt, based on whatever the criteria was. So they were allowed to get a larger square footage. They
Right.
didn't pay for it. So if they had a 500 square foot house, they would build them a new 500 square foot house. But it was a tremendous waste.
Now, what was the difference if you didn't have a cellar, or let's say you didn't have a basement?
Yeah.
Was it the same way?
To lift the house,
Right.
if you had a
Was it mandatory? If you had no basement,
they probably weren't gonna lift
if
it.
you had no basement,
If you had no
was it-
basement, they could lift it.
Right.
A lot of them were bungalows, they had no basements. So but a lot of them fell apart when they were lifting it.
right?
And so they went from the lifting and that was part of the waste.
But
They
the
were
construction-
lifting horrible shape, 70, 80, 90-year-old houses. It was the most ill-conceived thing I have ever seen, and to watch it.
I see that in
Listen to
Jersey.
Amy Peterson, who ran the program, explain why it was a good thing. I was like, this
Well,
was just not.
I saw that in Jersey. I saw that there was one community, the houseboats. Remember the houseboats? And they were lifted, they were falling apart.
Sorry, on that note, I think we have to send Avni to the auditorium. There's never enough time, unfortunately. But thank you all.
But we would also like to ask if either or both of you want to be on the stage in the auditorium with our
Anything
to
to say?
respond to questions, right, there were speakers to
You
join.
charge $5 an hour, so that's.
$5 an hour.
Thank you all.
You're short something there. But thank you